So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us here today. I am coming to you from a bit of a non-traditional location. I'm at the Massachusetts Emergency Management Warehouse in Franklin, Massachusetts. We're in the process of handing out 1.8 million COVID tests to be used during the holidays. Many of our schools and districts across the state signed up to take advantage of this. They can have up to 4 tests for students and staff to be used during the holidays, and DESE staff are here assisting in the process. I've been outside most of the day, so I still have my coat on just to kind of warm up a little bit. And it's been really nice to meet a lot of the staff from your buildings, from your schools, who are here picking up tests. I was told I look like a kind of undercover boss earlier today out there with my vest on and my hat on, helping to direct traffic, and I'll be back out after this presentation. And I hope it's just a small way that we can work to keep our schools safe and really promote kind of a healthy return from the upcoming vacations. And just speaking of those vacations, just want to start by expressing my gratitude to all of you as we look ahead to the Thanksgiving break. Just a time for us to step back and really focus on what we're grateful for. And I know that I am grateful for all that you are doing every day to provide FAPE, to create safe learning environments, to really expand what our students are experiencing in school because of your great efforts. And I am truly grateful. And so hope you get a chance just to maybe take some time with friends and family, and then come back and let's give it our all for our kids as we go into December and January as well. So thank you again. Look forward to just hearing about your great accomplishments on and in support of our students as we go into 2023. You know that we won't have a meeting in December, and so I won't see you again until January. So thanks for being here today. Let's talk a little bit more about today, though. Just two main topics for today. I'm really pleased that we have colleagues here today from the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Just to talk a lot more about what the commission can do to support schools and districts, a little bit more background on the supports that they provide and how you could take advantage of them. So kind of in the spirit of something we've been doing this year of really collaborating with our sister state agencies across the state to bring you information about how you can access their supports. Today, we are really pleased to have our colleagues from the Mass Commission here with us, and can't wait for you to learn more from them. I just have a couple of special ed updates. We'll make sure we have time for Q&A. And speaking of Q&A, just a reminder that the chat is closed, but the Q&A function is wide open. So please put your questions into the Q&A place there. That's how we will respond to anything that you came wanting to know more about today. I think it's going to be a shorter meeting than we typically do, so hopefully we'll save some time for Q&A, but hopefully we'll also get you back on your way to close out the week and get me back outside directing traffic. So let's jump in. So like I said, our first topic today is our colleagues from the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We have a great group assembled with us today, listed on this screen, and I'm just really pleased maybe to just turn it over to our colleagues, just so that you have a chance to learn from them. And really just starting with Margaret, I wonder if you just want to kick it off and just tell me when to advance the slides. I'll be glad to do that for you. And again, just gratitude for you being here today. Hopefully you can come on off mute. There you go. Great.
Okay. Sorry. So my name is Peggy Lee. Margaret's my official name. I'm the Director of Social Services at the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And Roberta Perry is actually going to be doing the presentation today. So I'm going to turn it over to Roberta. You're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. So technology. Thank you all. We are excited to share information to all of you about how hearing loss impacts the education for our deaf and hard of hearing constituents. As you can see from our first, you want to put on the first slide, please? Thank you. As you can see from that slide, We chose the title, What Can MCDHH Do for You? And with a subtitle of Important Considerations for Educating the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Students. Next slide, please. So my name is Roberta Perry, and I am a former children's specialist as well as a supervisor at the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And I also had the pleasantry of two other individuals who helped in this presentation. Peggy Lee, who you just met. She is the Director of Social Services at the Commission, and Aurora Wilbur, who is the Project Coordinator and Communications Liaison. I should also say that my title now is a liaison between MCDHH and DESE. So next slide, please. Okay, so the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing was actually established to be the primary state agency for providing information and support to deaf and hard of hearing throughout the Commonwealth. In 1999, with the advent of the newborn hearing screening, positions were created at the Commission for children's specialists, of which I was one of the original. And the purpose was because with the newborn hearing screening, the thought was we would catch more newborn babies, which we actually did. And the families would need individuals to help process through the information. So the positions were actually created in 1999. They are a group of specialized professionals who work with families as well as agencies. Their destiny or dedication is to identify the communication, the developmental, and the educational needs of the children diagnosed with the hearing loss. They provide technical assistance to early intervention and educational programs, and the focus is always on the communication and the cultural needs of the deaf and hard of hearing children. They provide comprehensive coordination of care from birth through high school or age 22, whichever that covers. So next slide, please. There are 4 children's specialists within the agency, and they are designated to 4 separate territories. So the Northeast region is covered by Melissa Dowler, and the Southeast region is Melissa Adams. The Central region is Terry Pancari, and the Western region is Emily Graves Harrison. And their contact information, as well as, you know, their names, etc., the regions they cover are up on this screen, and you will have in the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. So there are a number of factors which impact the communication, the language, and the academic development for specifically for kids that are identified with deaf or hard of hearing. One of those is the age at which the diagnosis occurs, their access to visual language, the degree of the hearing loss, the types of hearing loss, the hearing aid, the assistive technologies such as hearing aids, cochlear implants, and FM systems, their access to preschool programs, as well as professional supports, their family supports, and whether the child has additional needs. But the important thing to keep in mind is that communication, as we know, communication and language are the foundations of learning. Next slide, please. So the age of diagnosis. The newborn hearing screening has increased significantly the number of children identified with hearing loss at an early age. There are still, however, a number of children that don't get diagnosed until later on in childhood. So a later diagnosis obviously will impact the critical language development. They'll have reduced access to the speech and language within their environment. And actually, a language deprivation can occur if there is a chronic lack of full access to a natural language. And during this critical period of language acquisition, and it doesn't matter whether it's a spoken language or manual language, the key is they need a full access. So it's often referred to the first 5 years is often referred to as the critical window for the development of language. There is an elevated neurological sensitivity for the language development during these years. And the developing brain actually responds to language no matter how it's presented. So exposure to ASL is equivalent to the exposure to a spoken language. Next slide, please. The degree of hearing loss. The severity of hearing loss also impacts the amount of auditory information which is available to the child. So it impacts the overall auditory curriculum, which is to say the what, the why, the how, and the how well the students acquire language through the access to sound throughout their day. It also impacts social language and the interaction with peers. And it also impacts the incidental language learning. So I think it's interesting to point out that 80 to 90% of what children learn is through incidental learning. And incidental learning it's listening, and it happens all the time for children with normal hearing. So the children are just bombarded with auditory information by overhearing conversations, by the TV, by radio, from social interactions. So auditory experiences, sorry about that. Auditory experiences are all around us, and the incidental learning happens every day, all day, everywhere, and anywhere. So it's the most natural way for children to learn. Deaf and hard of hearing children, however, they have fewer opportunities to learn by all of this overhearing. So the access to incidental learning and opportunities will actually boost the literacy and the vocabulary development, and it also fosters the child's fund of knowledge. It occurs through observation, through repetition, through social interaction, as well as just general problem solving. So the fact that children with hearing loss either mishear or they don't hear at all during these opportunities has a significant impact on their vocabulary bank. Next slide, please. So the degree of hearing loss refers to the severity, and it's generally described as either a mild, a moderate, a severe, or a profound. And hearing losses that border in between are sometimes referred to as a combination of two categories, such as if it's a 60 decibel loss, someone may call it may be termed a moderate to severe loss. So the degrees of loss are measured in units called decibels or dB, and the measures refer to how loud in decibels a sound must be presented before it is detected. So a mild hearing loss would be between 26 to 40 decibels. A moderate would be between 41 and 50. A moderate to severe would be 56 to 70. And then a severe hearing loss would be 71 to 90. A profound loss would be 91 to 100. I've provided a link below, which is a great resource for understanding more fully the relationship of hearing loss to listening and the learning needs. So one thing I wanted to point out the degree of hearing loss measured in decibels does not equate to percentage. I know a lot of times if you ask someone what the level of their hearing loss is, they'll say, oh, it's 70%. Well, 70 decibels does not equal 70%. It's not a unilateral, or it doesn't equate to the same thing. They're two different terminologies. Next slide, please. So the audiologist is professionally trained and licensed, and it is their role to measure the hearing loss and to make recommendations about assistive technology. So the audiogram is actually a chart that shows the results of the hearing test. It shows how well the person hears a sound across a spectrum of frequencies or pitches from low to high. And it also shows the intensity or the loudness that a sound needs to be before it is detected. So speech is actually comprised of sounds that fall into this range of frequencies. And the following chart actually shows how speech and everyday sounds in the environment are impacted depending on the severity of loss and at which frequencies. Next slide. So this is actually an audiogram, and you can see the picture, how on the top line, those are the frequencies, those are the pitches that get measured. And then the line going down is actually how loud a sound needs to be before it is detected. You see that little yellow thing in the middle, that's referred to as the speech banana, because you can see where a lot of sounds, which are primary sounds in language and words, etc., are in that little area. So you can see where once you get to 20 decibel loss, you can be missing some very important critical pieces of information, and it's going to impact overall communication language development. Next slide, please. So there are types of hearing loss and that you may hear. There are basically 4 types. There's a sensory neural loss, which occurs within the inner ear or along the auditory or the hearing nerve, and there's damage and it's permanent. We can't yet come up with a way to revitalize nerves. The conductive loss actually occurs in the outer ear or in the middle ear, where sound waves are actually unable to be carried to the inner ear where it gets interpreted. And this loss can be reversible. Mixed would be, as the word implies, a combination of sensory neural and conductive. And then the last is auditory neuropathy spectrum. This is characterized by a compromised signal in the processing along the auditory nerve and by a deterioration of speech perception. Okay, next slide. I should point out too that losses are also, you can have a loss either bilateral, meaning both ears, or unilateral, which would be in one ear. And I know a lot of times people say, well, it's only in one ear, so they've got a fully functioning, good ear. Well, it still impacts the ability to receive sound and to interpret it into language, because they are, dependent on that one supposedly good ear. So even a child that has a unilateral loss does not mean that, they're free to skate, they're not going to have any difficulty. They're still going to have difficulty because it impacts sound localization, and it just distorts the signal that's coming in that's trying to be interpreted. So the reduced access to language, and whether it's spoken or manual, it reduces, it affects the foundations of language, of vocabulary and literacy, and it includes the background knowledge, which those are the new concepts, the new vocabulary, the multiple meanings, the idiomatic language that we hear around us. Again, it gets back to that incidental learning, how important that is. It impacts the functional language. So oftentimes there's a misunderstanding or a misuse of the verb tense, a lot of times because they don't hear those endings. Pluralization, the same thing. They're missing those S's and on the end of the word, so they're not understanding. There's a non-agreement sometimes between the subject and the verb and the possessives. It also impacts the curriculum, the overall vocabulary, the number of concepts, the language, the problem-solving skills. All of that is impacted by the reduced access to language. And it can also impact the reading comprehension as well as the written expression. Next slide, please. So continuing on with this reduced access, students with hearing loss tend to have what we call a Swiss cheese language. It's unpredictable, that they have gaps in their level of knowledge, in their vocabulary, and in concepts, because they don't hear it. And again, it's that incidental learning. They miss out on that. So, consequently, as they're developing their foundation of knowledge, there's all these little holes because they're not getting the input from the incidental learning. Students with hearing loss do not access verbal communication as fully as their hearing peers. And they're at high risk for delayed vocabulary acquisition, for vocabularies tend to be smaller in size and less sophisticated. They can experience struggles with the English verb system, and they lack access to the actual morphological information or the development of words. So it's important to keep in mind too that hearing aids and cochlear implants do not restore hearing to normal. They are merely an assistive listening device, which is helping them to have access to sound that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to. Next slide, please. Again, there's a lot, people don't understand the reduced access and the full impact that it has on learning and development. So listening and learning in a classroom can be very challenging for students with hearing loss because there's noise all around. There's the air conditioning. There's, if a door is open, people walking in the hallways. I mean, there's just a lot of noise, which individuals that have hearing are automatically tuning out because they've had a lot of ability and exposure to do that. And we do it without even thinking about it. But, it's very troublesome for kids in a classroom. So the effort that it requires for the students to listen, it often results in a reduced retention, fatigue, attention challenges. The brain, it has to compensate and work harder to process the same information as their hearing peers. And it just continues to add to additional stress and the fatigue. And so you can only imagine throughout the whole day, got to struggle, listen, process. By the end of the day, these poor students are just burnt. And although two students might have similar looking hearing loss on paper, their history and the experience will play an important role in how successful they will be. So again, that list of factors back in the beginning that I mentioned, those will all play out in determining the ultimate success of the student. So outcomes are based on those number of variables. Next slide, please. So for you as educators, signs that a child may have a hearing loss and perhaps you aren't aware of or weren't told about, things to watch for in your classrooms, or having a limited or unclear speech, not following directions or paying attention, sometimes looking off, hearing only parts of a conversation. So for example, if a teacher's up giving directions, or if they turn their, back to the students, maybe they'll ask perhaps to have the information repeated, and sometimes they won't, but only getting parts of that conversation behind them, because again, in a classroom setting, there's conversations going on all around them sometimes in group settings, etc. And they may not be getting full access to that. So not being able to hear everyday sounds such as the school bell or the morning announcements. And they may just struggle overall to learn new information and concepts. Next slide, please. Okay, Aurora, I need your help here. We've identified a simulation that actually will show what a child with a mild hearing loss what they might experience in a spelling test. So hopefully we'll be able to access, the unfair test.
I'm sorry,
Aurora,
did you want me to click on the link?
I hopefully that will go through to the right link. We just thought it would be more powerful to have an actual, stimulation of what it's like to hear. I don't know if you're going to be able to access.
I wonder if I'm sorry, I wasn't queued up to do that. I do apologize. I wonder if
Okay.
maybe we could just have people look at it afterwards.
Sure.
If that's all right. Yeah, by using the link. Oh.
Okay. Yeah, we were, excuse me. We weren't quite sure how this was going to be managed, and I thought I was going to do the actual, presentation, and then Aurora was going to have the controls. But that's fine, and I can just kind of, if you can, go on the link, and it has a person giving a list of 10 spelling words, and the first scenario is indication of a mild hearing loss and what the child might be hearing, and then there's a repetition of it with adding in a couple of the frequencies that they would have access to, and then there's a third one where they complete all 5, all 10 of the words. And through this progression, it's really, it's mind-boggling actually, because in the first one, I know for me even, you go and you want to turn up the volume because you think that's going to help you to hear better. Well, you may catch a little bit more, but it's still not making it clear. And vowels carry a lot more energy than a lot of the consonants. So like in the first couple of words, you may hear the vowel, but the beginning and the end, what the actual word is, you may not quite get. And then in the second scenario, you may pick up some. And then in the last one, you may actually be surprised because you thought it was one word, and then it ends up being another one, because why? It sounds the same, so that is kind of why we wanted to put that out there. And I apologize that we're not able to do that, but please, do that on your own, and hopefully it will have some impact. So, okay, so we can go to the next slide then. So that goes along with those were some of the questions. The whole scenario is about a mild hearing loss and how people struggle to hear, and increasing the volume doesn't necessarily increase the clarity, and so okay, next slide. So least restrictive environment, LRE. The goal of this presentation was to highlight the many challenges that deaf and hard of hearing students face in school and why programming is so important. And it's hoped that the information presented gives you a better understanding as to, why the regular classroom may not be the least restrictive environment for the deaf and hard of hearing student. And that is not to mean that the regular classroom is never the proper setting. The key to keep in mind is it's important to bring in the specialists who can help you in identifying the accommodations and or the modifications that will help that student to get the access to the classroom and the information. So we've listed a number of resources for you to follow up on. And we think that they're really, powerful, and hopefully you will find the same. So next slide. Again, in wrapping up, so our presentation was just merely an overview. Certainly there are courses and degrees, spent on hearing loss and its impact. But we wanted to give you an overview of the challenges that the deaf and hard of hearing students face during their day, and just their day-to-day life activities. A lot of times can be overlooked because hearing loss is invisible. And so what can MCDHH do for you? Well, our best resources are the children's specialists. They are looking forward to work. They're eager to work with y'all and help you in navigating and providing and identifying, the right supports for these children. And there's no charge for the services. So hopefully you will take advantage of their assistance. Again, there are 4 regions. The 4 names and contact information were identified earlier. So feel free to reach out to them. MCDHH also has a communication access trainer who can actually provide assessment of the learning environment with recommendations for ensuring the access. Again, they can go in and scope out the auditory interferences that may be going on that you may or may not be, privy to or aware of. And lastly, MCDHH screens and maintains a registry of qualified educational interpreters. So that's it. I'm done.
Roberta, thank you so much. I really apologize for just not knowing that I needed to be ready to show a video. And it sounds like a really useful tool. I think it's often a great way to just sort of develop better empathy for what our students experience. And so I just really appreciate this entire presentation. If you wouldn't mind sticking around till the end in case there are any questions, you're able to see them, Peggy, as well in the Q&A. And so why don't we just, if you don't mind, I'll just wrap up the rest of the presentation, then we can see if there's anything that you all would like to respond to. But again, I just really appreciate you and your team being here and sharing this information. So thank you again. Peggy, please.
So is it possible for the children's specialist to pop on camera just for a minute,
yes,
so people can introduce themselves?
I love it. I think it's so important to put faces with names. This is all human work. And so Peggy, would you like to introduce them? But I would love that. Thank you.
Sure. So I know that Melissa, Terry, and Terry are here. So hold on. Now we'll just wait for Terry.
I'm going to stop my share so that it helps with the viewing on screen.
Perfect. So I will let them introduce themselves. Emily Graves Harrison is the Western Children's Specialist. She is not working today, so she's not here, but I will let Terry, Melissa introduce themselves quickly.
All good. We have time.
I'll go first. So I'm Melissa Adams. I cover the Southeast Cape and the Islands. So think everything south of Boston, Braintree, Milton, Quincy on down, and then Plainville over.
I'll go. I'm Terry Pancari. I'm a children's specialist from Central Mass, so cover everything that falls into that area.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Dowler, and I cover Boston and the Northeast. Thanks for having us today.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I wonder if maybe
Thank you.
before we go on, is there anything more that you would say about your roles? Like, what do you think are, if you want school districts to know one critical thing about the role that you play, maybe we could just end with just a quick response to that question, just to further educate our very esteemed district colleagues.
I will.
Roberta,
Being,
please go right ahead.
being one of the original children's specialists, I would just like to say that we are neutral. I know it may seem sometimes that, we're coming on in opposition. We're not really in opposition. Our role is to identify, the supports, that the children need. And that's all we're trying to present. And we're really, we're there to help. We're part of the team. And, I hope you all will feel that we're part of your team. We're not in there to try to instigate anything or so.
Yeah. And I think, having just working with you all as resources, I think, Roberta, I appreciated the information you shared. It was a good kind of reminder. And I hope we all could walk away with a few things that just, kind of like, that few, additional thoughts. I'm sure different parts resonated with different people about the importance of this work. And I wonder if, just hoping to use your entire team as just resources to think about how do we translate what you shared into effective services for students.
Right.
So thank you all very, very much. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, just stick around to the end to see if there are other questions, but I appreciate you all coming on screen, and Roberta, really appreciate the presentation. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all. All right, I'll share my screen again. And Brian, are we looking good here?
Yes, you are.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so just two special education updates today. The first one is really, something sort of interesting in the way of timing came from the federal government just recently that kind of matches up with something that we're experiencing in Massachusetts. So what we know across the state right now is that we do see an increase in the number of homeless students. And many of the homeless students who we see in the state are students who qualify both as either refugee or immigrant students. And we know that we want to make sure we get services to those students in a timely way, as well as to all other children who are experiencing a high level of mobility. So it turns out that just on November 10th, the U.S. Department of Education, the OSERS, released a letter to state special education directors. It's written in a way, though, that I think it's easy for all of us to pick up and read and understand. And it really, emphasizes this need to make sure that we provide as immediate services as possible for children who are highly mobile and qualify for special education. And it really made two important points. The first one is sort of resonating with me a lot. I'm actually hearing some concerns about this from across the state. And it's really the first one that I really want to highlight the most today in terms of the issues that are identified in this letter. We've linked the letter, as we often do, in the title of this slide. And so the November 10th letter is where you can actually access it. But just thinking about, a highly mobile child who needs to be evaluated, we want to make sure that evaluation is really expedited. And for you and your teams to be thinking through, what does it mean to expedite an evaluation for a highly mobile child? We just want to make sure that there's just not a delay in getting services. We know the impact in many cases of what it means to be highly mobile on your educational experience. And so if you and your team could just be looking out for who are these children, and again, they fall into several different categories: military connected children, migratory children, children who are homeless, and children who are in foster care. All of those categories, all those experiences of our children can lead to a high level of mobility. And so just making sure that we are evaluating children in a really timely way. And I think that, I was having a conversation about this earlier this week about how we've really built our system, right, so that it works to make sure that we meet the overall timelines. And I think it's important that we look for, when we have children who are highly mobile, how we just have to think outside of the regular timeline and speed up those evaluations for those children, get them in line in a different way to expedite their evaluations and make sure we can make those eligibility determinations as quickly as possible. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing to make that happen. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to be able to help you in this department. And then, we all know that when you get an IEP from a child who's moved in from another community who actually has an IEP, right? Maybe in the first instance, they don't. Under issue 1, under issue 2 is when a child moves in with an IEP and there's a need to identify comparable services. We want to make sure that we get that set up and then reconvene as necessary. If it's not quite clear what it means to provide the exact services that are in the IEP, we need to provide comparable services. I know we're all used to that. I know that happens on a very regular basis for children in general who just come in and out of our districts, much less highly mobile students. But one of the things that that OSER's really called out in this letter is just to make sure that we remember that this also applies to ESY. Here it is a chilly day in November. It's a long way off from ESY, but just a good thing to be thinking about as we look ahead during this school year. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the letter. It does have some further information about requirements related to those issues, and it provides key resources for additional information. And again, I just think it's really timely to bring this up as we know that we're seeing an influx of children who are refugee and immigrant children, and we just want to make sure we support them as best we can. Moving on, just a quick note of celebration. December 2nd is National Special Education Day. I am really grateful to my son's district who pointed this out to me just recently. I will not take credit for remembering it myself, but I'm a listener, I'm a learner, and really appreciate the way in which districts are marking this. Thinking back to when the nation's first special education law was signed by President Ford in 1975. We also know that this is an important year in Massachusetts, 50 years of our own special education law. And I just think anything we can do to acknowledge the accomplishments of our educators, our administrators, our students, our parents. I know in my son's district, there's a call out to nominate a special ed teacher who the district could, just commemorate as part of the celebration on December 2nd. Anything we can do to just, keep morale high, keep our teachers know that we care about them, that we appreciate them, that we support them, and encourage you to look for creative ways to do the same. As we just think about the, just that critical role that we're all here to serve, which is that strong connection between educators and children. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. And anything we can do just to help strengthen that, I think is so important. So to all of us in a season of celebration, celebrating National Special Education Day on December 2nd. Like I said, today was going to be a little bit of a faster meeting. We are wrapping up our meetings for 2022. We'll be back with you in 2023. I know that again, while we've had and so appreciate the other agencies from across Massachusetts that also serve children coming to us this year, from Mass Commission for the Blind to the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who we heard from today. I know that DDS is also looking forward to joining us in the new year, and MRC, I believe, as well. So we should be hearing from more of our fellow state agencies as we come into the new year. If you have any questions, anything that you want to make sure we line up for you in 2023, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to turn it over now to Q&A, and Jamie, I know